Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
We're back.
Hey. Welcome to the Wacky Hour.
It feels to me like, I know it was last week. This week feels like another one of those weeks where it's like, oh, we like missed a week or two and we're coming back. And we haven't. We re-recorded last week. The show went up Tuesday. Like
everything happened as it should be.
But I had a 3-day
into it low energy.
I had a 3-day weekend, and that throws everything off. It like makes it feel like you're on another planet.
Oh,
but not that I'm complaining. I'd take a 3-day weekend.
I was there for all of it. At my job, everybody went out of town, I think, so it was really dead. But still had to be there, and that was bullshit. I don't appreciate it.
It was weird because we ended up on Memorial Day taking Lincoln to the zoo. It was her first trip to the zoo. A lot of reasons. I mean, pandemic and everything, but also like her age. You know, you take them too early, and they don't understand.
There's a point where you have to teach your kid that a tiger can fuck you up.
Right.
And
no, she doesn't know that. She thinks that they're her best friend. Every animal's
not her. I mean you specifically.
Me.
The tiger can fuck daddy up.
You think daddy can save you from everything, but we're here to prove that's wrong.
Lincoln, I brought you here so you know self-reliance, because I won't be able to save you from this silverback.
But anyway, my point was we had two hopes. One, the Columbus Zoo, up until like Tuesday, they just stopped doing it. But as of Monday, Memorial Day, they were still doing like before 2, if you wanted to go, you had to buy a timed ticket. So they were only letting X amount of people in per like half hour. And we thought, well, hopefully that'll help with, distancing. And I kind of knew better, but Tara was like, yeah, and it's Memorial Day. And so a lot of people will probably be home doing family stuff. They won't be going to the zoo. That was fucking wrong. I found out kind of after the fact that the time tickets were only for non-members. If you were a zoo member, you can go whenever you want. And there's a whole lot of people that have zoo memberships. And 2, nobody did family shit at home. Everybody went to the fucking zoo. It was, when we first got there anyway, it was awful. I mean, it was like a scene from The Walking Dead with a zombie horde, that many people. And it's like, oh shit, this isn't great. But it cleared out a little bit. And Lincoln had a black, like I wasn't sure how that part went.
Like, what the fuck? There are just animals in there. This is bullshit.
There was a lot of people. We got there, and the timing of it, our tickets were for 11:30. We actually got there closer to 12 because we're late to everything. But that was like lunchtime for Lincoln. So literally, we like drove all the way. It's an hour from our house up to the zoo. We drove all that way to immediately find a bench to sit down and eat the packed lunch at, which Lincoln thought was great because she's never got to eat like outside at a picnic table. But everything. It's great when you have a kid that's that age, because anything new is like awesome to them. But while we were sitting there, because that's right by the entrance, like there was a lot of people that were like kind of leaving, like, oh, we'll just have to come back when it's less crowded. And it's like, I get it, it's disappointing. Like we got there, we were a little disappointed, but you can't be like, I can't believe other people decided to do the thing that I also decided to do today. It's like,
yeah, that's fair. But I've also been to like, I've gone out to things and been like, this is a little too packed for my taste. And,
no, I'm not saying they're wrong.
I don't have a problem like being like, okay, well, let's bail on this. And
no, certainly, and they weren't wrong to leave. In fact, it was great that they left, because by the end of the day, it was a lot nicer experience. But like my point is, you can't be mad that other people also wanted to do the thing that you wanted to do.
Yeah.
You could be disappointed, but it's like me every time I try to get a fucking haircut, because I'll pick I'll be like, I'm going to take off work and go at like 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. And then you get there and they're like, oh no, this is our busy hour. You have a 2-hour wait. It's like, what the fuck? But like, I cannot pick a good time to get a haircut. But anyway, my point was, apparently nobody like did the like stay at home cookout stuff. Everything that I saw from people that did anything, either you didn't do anything, which is fine. That's my preferred way to spend holidays. Or you went and
fucking everyone
did something like we did.
Everyone I knew was like going camping. Like anybody who didn't have to work, they were going out camping, which at a certain point, there's so many people going camping that you're not camping anymore. You've just moved society to the woods. And like,
and society's awful. Like that defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
The whole purpose of the woods is to get away from society, not take it with you.
And I thought, we could get away for the weekend, and you, me, and 20 other guys cannot catch fish because we're all there together.
My brother and his wife, every Memorial Day and Labor Day, they'd take an extra long weekend. It used to drive me nuts when she worked for us because that meant it's like, 3-day weekend coming up, but the day before I'm going to have to do somebody else's work because they get to take a 4-day weekend instead. But anyway, they would go camping both holidays. It was kind of their thing. And yeah, that was my thing. It's like they loved it, but I'm like, that's the worst possible time because it's crowded.
Nope, you go camping in the dead of winter when you're the only one doing it. And then it's real survival. You have to have like 15 of those little propane tanks. Just to keep
I'll tell you, one of my favorite hikes I ever went on, it was middle of January, but it was like negative 10 degrees out, and there was about a foot of snow on the ground. It was kind of fresh snow, but it had done one of those things where it snowed and then got a little warm and then dropped like sub-zero. So it was that like ice hard, like snow rocks basically on the ground. Oh. But Tara had to work, and this was way before Lincoln, and I was sitting at home, and she was working all, like, a double shift or something on the weekend. I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to go hiking.
And it was awesome. It would be cool to go piss off a bear. I'll be back.
That was that was a different time that I kind of got followed by 2 starving dogs that were chasing a deer and then decided to veer off towards me instead. That was fun.
That's really funny. To imagine you just like not fully running away, but kind of like fast walking as these 2 dogs just sort of kind of like feel you out.
Amazingly, because nothing in my character would suggest this, but I tend to react okay in those situations because I know the nature of dogs. And so I know like the worst thing to do is to try to like run or retreat or turn your back to them. You have to kind of like do that thing where you act like, yeah, I'm not intimidated by you, where really you're like, please don't piss myself, please don't piss myself.
They'll smell the piss.
Looking around for like a big stick. and then fortunately they followed me a little bit with their like hackles up, kind of growling and stuff. And then they decided that the deer seemed like a better prey, which was dumb on them because they could have easily killed and eaten me. They were never going to catch that deer, but they went off and along on their way. But it was kind of terrifying, but you have to act like it's not. And then every time I went hiking by myself after that, I took at least a knife or something with me, as if a knife would have changed the tide of that
some
fight.
Fucking Revenant shit. It's just like, it's going to rip my fucking throat out, but I'll put one right in its fucking eye. Yeah.
And the problem is, because a lot of people say, well, take a gun, because you can here as long as it's open carry. And it's like, yeah, but I would never shoot a dog. I would knife them to death if they're attacking me, but if there's something in me that is like, I don't think I'd shoot the dog because there's a part of you that says it's not going to attack me until it's too late. And once you're being like wrestled to the ground by a dog that's trying to kill you, a knife's better than a gun.
I just imagine it latching onto your arm, and then you pull out the gun, but then you shoot your hand or something. Like
the dog gets it, and you're like, oh shit, the dog's got a gun now.
All right, now he's armed and biting me. I'm fucked.
Steve's Nature Adventures. There's like the Bear Grylls show. I would make a great show because I'd be the opposite of Survivor Man. It's like how to die in 24 hours.
The most important thing is to look like you have everything under control as you're dying.
I fall through the ice and there's somebody on shore with a rope like, oh, do you need me to save you? And it's like, nope. I've got it. As long as I act like I'm not drowning, I'll be okay.
The important thing is when you fall into freezing temperature water, you just clench your butt cheeks, and this will increase your just you sink to the bottom.
Don't panic. Just act like everything's normal. Pretend you're reading a newspaper. You just see me reading an invisible 90% newspaper. 90% of your
buoyancy escapes through fear, so don't have any fear. This is the non-essential podcast.
I know. I'm kind of thinking that this topic of like, I wish I had more nature stories. We'll just go into that. That's my topic this week. But no, that's not what this show is.
Yeah. On this show, we don't tell stories about ourselves. We do, but we're not supposed to. We tell other stories from the internet.
In fact, it's like the number one complaint about us, but that's all right.
Yeah. Well, fuck it. You should have known better. We're almost at 150 of these things. What the fuck did you think we would do? Anyway, we tell each other stories. They're about anything. Steve has one. I'm going to go lie down.
I thought it was your turn this week.
It's not.
Oh, damn. No. I do have one, but I'm pulling a play out of your playbook, although I've done it before too, where I had a whole bunch of topics that were interesting but had zero motivation to write about them. So I've got a creepypasta.
Playbook, being lazy.
Yeah. Lazy. No, the creepypasta as my source of inspiration.
Exactly, being lazy.
Yeah.
That's where it came from. The sad origins.
This story is from a person named Shadowswimmer77, which sounded really familiar.
That's me.
It sounded really familiar. I'm like, I went and clicked on their name to look through what else they had posted, because I was like, I'm pretty sure we have not done a story by them, but like 80% of people that write creepypastas have the word shadow in their name, in one form or another. So
they're cool.
So anyway, Shadowswimmer77. It's called I Found a Dark and Lonely Road. I think that was also a Green Day song.
That was the original title, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It didn't fit in the meter.
Well, he wanted to change their name to Shadow Day, but the other two guys were like, "No, we're not doing that."
No, it's Green Shadow, and they couldn't agree on the placement of shadow, so they just kept it how it was.
Green Shadow. That sounds like a marijuana strain.
It probably is. Seth Rogen's personal brand. I try to live my life without too many regrets. I've had highs and I've had lows like everybody else, sure. But I do what I can not to worry too much about what could have happened if I'd made a different choice. If maybe I hadn't taken taken the road less traveled. I figure everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available to them at the time.
And everything turned out okay.
Yeah, that sentence makes me wonder if he's met other people before.
Yeah.
Or himself. I don't make the best decisions. And a lot of times I know I'm not making the best decisions, but I say, fuck it, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get where he's saying, you make the best decisions with what you have, but because it's you can only regret shit if you can look back on it,
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking of all the times that I've had groceries that I can make this healthy dinner with the groceries that I already paid for, or I could buy a triple cheeseburger and fries. The groceries I already bought will go bad, so it's a waste of money. Yeah. And I'm eating this food that's going to kill me. And you know how many times I pick the triple cheeseburger with fries?
But I don't
a lot.
But I do that too. But I don't regret it.
I regret it for the next hour or two. But yeah,
I know what I did. The only time you regret it is when that shit makes you sick. That's when I regret it, because then I got deceived.
Well, see, that's kind of where I've gotten to in my life with those things. I regret it the next morning when I wake up and feel like shit and realize that I just ate 3 days worth of calories for no reason. Yeah. And I'm I'll never do that again until tonight when it's time to decide what to do.
And then we're reloading.
Right. Okay. Going through all the what ifs is ridiculous, because the only way you could have made a different choice is if you'd had some other detail, which of course you didn't. Hindsight is perfect, and even then, you can never be sure exactly what the sequence of events might have looked like if you'd gone right instead of left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road I took, that I just can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if I'd only done something different. These are some long sentences.
Yeah. I get what he's saying, though. I agree with him.
Yeah.
He's right. You're wrong.
Oh, that's typical.
Shadow Buddy he's the new co-host, because we have more in common. Sorry, Steve.
My job has me move around pretty regularly. I'm not going to get into what I do. That has no bearing on the story. But a couple of years ago, I was working in Philadelphia and living on the other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Why don't you want to tell us what you do?
Because he's a serial killer.
Yeah, only shady fucks are like that. Mm-hmm. You don't have to tell me what store, but if you work at a fucking grocery store, you just say, I work at a grocery store.
Yeah, but I get the impression he says he moves around a lot. So my job has to be moved around a lot because I'm one of those contractors that takes people's money and then never completes the job, and then I have to leave town before I get arrested. Not that that has any bearing on this story. Okay. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and since this was the closest I'd been to home since I'd moved out to college, I took the chance to go see my parents whenever I could. I knew I'd be moving again before long, and my folks aren't getting any younger, so I tried to find a weekend every month or so to make the 7-hour trip to visit them. Jeez, I'm lucky to, see my parents every other weekend, and they live, 25 minutes away.
That's a lot of work.
Mm. Fairness, I talk to my dad almost every day because I work with him, but whatever. If I'd been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, I'd probably tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of in Jersey to avoid the traffic during rush hour. But by the time I realized it, the lease was signed and there wasn't much I could do. It seems like a big thing to overlook, oh wait, this place isn't actually close to work, and I could have lived close to work. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring, honestly. I'd take the Ben Franklin Bridge across the river, head up I-476 for an hour or so, then a long slog across basically the entire expanse of PA on I-80, before another hour north on I-79 to Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. The only variance in the drive was how long it would take me to get through Philly, because once I got on the 476 extension, I could typically predict my ETA within 5 or 10 minutes. My second summer in New Jersey, I'd taken 2 weeks off and planned on spending the second week in Erie. Things changed the first Wednesday, though, because a big storm blew through and knocked out power in a good part of the area where I was living. That's like your forte now.
Yeah, I'm an expert.
Dealing with 90-degree heat with no air conditioning wasn't something I particularly felt like spending the first half of my vacation doing. So after one uncomfortably sweaty night, I let my parents know I'd be heading over a few days early, which is smart because I thought he was going the other way with it. I'd have to stick around until the power came back. But he's like, fuck this. I'm out. In retrospect, I should have left the first thing in the morning, but because I had a couple things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on towards mid-afternoon.
Oh my god. This story has everything I love, which is multiple locations and way too many times mentioned. And this is so much fucking setup. I just god damn it. To be fair, my attention span's really short, so the moment you're like, hey, I went here and then I went here, I'm like, God, get to the point.
Where's the monster?
Okay, which part has the fucking ghost? Just start there.
For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was particularly heavy. It's because the Eagles had just won the Super Bowl in the middle of summer for some reason. And by the time I finally got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule. Since based on my normal timeline, I figured I'd still be able to make it in early enough to grab a dinner and beer with my dad and my brother before crashing in for the night, which is weird to me because earlier he said it was a 7-hour drive.
Google Maps is telling me it's 6 hours and 30 minutes, which means I can probably get there in 5 if I book ass down the highway. Wow, a siren just went by my house. I
was so fucking confused because I thought it was going through by my house, and I'm like, I'm in my basement. If I can hear the siren that good, it's like crashing through my front door.
It's just you hear a bang upstairs, and I would make you keep recording. You got to be a professional.
Way off topic.
This is
the great thing for at least for me. Maybe it's just me because I have I've talked about before, hearing loss on one side, and if you're not familiar with that, when you can't hear very good out of one side, but you hear okay out of the other, it makes it really hard to pinpoint where sounds are coming from because that's how your brain does that. It takes the 2 points of information and then can kind of triangulate. But so maybe it's just me, but sirens are interesting because they're one of those noises that you can hear from a pretty good distance off. That's their whole point. But they also seem to be one of those sounds that isn't particularly clear where it's coming from if there's a lot of buildings around, because it echoes.
You can only tell if it's like far away or close.
Yeah, you can tell if it's drawing near, but not where it's coming from or going.
Yeah.
Anyway.
To be fair, most of those things are for traffic, and if it's getting closer, doesn't matter. You pull over. You're like,
and you get ready to hop right on the tailgate and follow it wherever you're going, because that's a free pass through traffic.
Exactly.
And they can't pull you over. They're on their way to someplace.
It's like you have an emergency to tend to.
Anyway, so he figured he could still make it in time for dinner and a beer with his dad and brother before crashing for the night. Two things I hadn't taken into consideration were the number of other folks that apparently had the same idea to get out of town that I did, and the road construction that must have sprung up in the time since my last home trip. The interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65 or 70, or in some remote places like West Texas, even faster than that, makes cross-country...
This guy is fucking... Guy or girl. So we started it like being philosophical about the nature of choice, and if we really have one, and then we're rambling about like fucking locations and time it takes to get there, and now we're marveling at the wonder that is modern roads.
Yeah, you'll love this whole paragraph.
I'm going insane. It's been 10 minutes.
I will let you know, just so you stew on it and get angry and angrier, that I didn't pick a random story. I mean, I did, but I went through like probably 10 stories. I was like, this one will be great.
It's just one of those ones where it's like, God damn it, if you had an editor, like not even an official one, just like show it to your friend and they'd be like, you probably don't need that.
We've talked about it before, but we'll inject some writing, as if we're expert writers, but some writing advice is generally you write a piece and then cut 50% of it. Like, there's at least half that you don't need. Nobody likes to do that, because then you go from a piece that you're like, oh, I've got this novel, to now you're like, I've got 3 chapters. Yeah. But that's how it works. So the interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along, blah, 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 makes cross-country automobile travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise.
It reminded me of how much I enjoyed irrigation.
Yes. I can't tell you the number of times my folks have reminisced about the days before the interstate, when going to see friends outside of D.C. would take almost twice as long as it does now. What's truly remarkable to me, though, is that even though the entire system of highways was built start to finish in a mere 35 years... it sure seems like when parts of it go under construction, they stay that way forever. So now he's taking the time to inject this, like, ho-ho, about road construction, like...
And airline food, am I right, fellas? Like, what the fuck is this? Hey, get to the fucking plot. Holy shit.
Traffic was uncharacteristically heavy, but moving... and I was making decent time until I saw the first orange warning signs letting me know that our 4 lanes were reducing to 3, and then 2, and then 1. Hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see, and see I certainly could as the cars in front of me reached a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I had ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved a mile in an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started gurgling.
This is so fucked up. Because he literally could have started with, like, I was going to visit my family, and then I got stuck in a traffic jam during road construction, and we could start from here. And the fucking plot would be the same.
Same. If you want to inject that he's used to road travel, you could say, I normally travel a lot at some point in that. Or I was going to see my parents like I often did. You know, yeah, you can... Anyway.
You can assume somebody driving in a story knows how to drive. Unless they specify, I didn't know how to drive. And then that would be a really interesting intro. Because then it's like, he's going to do this big trip but has no fucking idea what he's doing.
I was 8 years old at the time, and I thought it would be fun to drive cross-country. Like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
With an exit just ahead and no end to the traffic jam in sight, I got off and found a diner to grab some dinner. God, that's hard to say, diner, dinner. Even if traffic miraculously picked up, I still had a solid 5 hours of driving ahead of me. So at that point, I knew for sure it was going to be pretty late that I was getting in. After finishing eating, I got back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a couple miles, but then I came up to the back end of the jam and was right back to waiting. We were moving a little bit better, I think averaging about 5 miles an hour at that point. But as the sun started edging towards the horizon, I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google Maps could clue me in on any kind of workaround. That's a long time to be in a traffic jam to be like, maybe I should go a different way.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess in my mind, there's like clearly no other route for a while.
Well, that's how I was picturing it until he says he's going to pull out his phone and look for another
Google
route.
Maps is going to be like, you could just like, you don't
Drive
have
on the
to
shoulder.
Obey the rules. You could get off
The other side of the highway is up 4 lanes. How good are you at Dodge? Have you ever played, what is that game? I can't think of the one, fuck it, where you're supposed to crash. Anyway, it's a funny thing about human nature. Most of us don't like to sit still. Studies at airports showed people would rather walk further to baggage claim to get their luggage, even if the total time would have been less if they'd had to sit and have a slightly longer wait at plane side. While the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor, though I-80 still showed a dark red band for another 50 miles or so, there was a southbound county road coming up in a few miles and a northbound a couple after that, either of which looked like they'd let me bypass the worst of the traffic. Since I'd spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was about worn out, and I opted to take the southbound road, even though the app told me it would ultimately take about another 30 minutes longer to get to my parents' house.
Can I just, like, point out, we had a Creepypasta on this show just a few weeks ago where the guy had to set up the fact that he drove into a cornfield. And he did it quicker than this guy can explain finding a detour in construction. Like,
right, like it seems to me, and I get it because a lot of us do this too. Like the airport baggage thing, it's a factoid that the author knew, and so they were just looking for an excuse to cram it in there to be like, look, I know this. Whatever.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get moving again and reasoned at this rate it might take me more than the 30-minute difference to get to the northbound route anyway.
I want to get it moving too, man. Let's go.
I'll just start scrolling to random paragraphs.
No, we got to see how long this goes, but this is the most preamble shit.
If it makes you feel good, we're about a third of the way through. Judging by my little scroll bar thing over here.
This is going to be one paragraph of like, and then a ghost happened.
And I never drove on that road again. I made the turn off and immediately felt my mood improve. The signs alternated. What? The signs alternated, limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour. But even that seemed like flying compared to the logjam I'd spent the last several hours in. The drive was interesting. The road started a little twisty, with plenty of elevation changes as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest diagonal, but turned and doubled back on itself enough. For the first 30 minutes or so, I got regular views of the stalled traffic on I-80. Pretty soon after that, though, just about the time that the sun was just dipping down beneath a couple of the hills in my rearview mirror, the road took a long, curving tack and carried me down and away out of sight of the interstate. Now, something that a lot of people don't realize is how big of a state Pennsylvania is. Sure, there are plenty of bigger ones, but PA is deceptively big, and it's remote, isolated. Hell, the translation of the name means Penn's Woods, after all. What the fuck does that have to do with anything?
This guy is... holy shit. It's like all trivia and like completely like
that was just weird.
Musings about life.
The state is big. If you don't believe me, the name basically means Penn's Woods. It's like, well, Penn's Woods could be an
this
acre.
This is like a fucking Bob Ross fucking horror story. or attempt at a horror story, like, where he's just like trying to get to the final fucking picture, but he just keeps rambling.
The Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish that aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any direction without seeing anything like another human being. It's got a decent number of big cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have a big enough population to support major sports teams. That doesn't mean shit. But away from those centers of development, the Harrisburgs and the Pottsvilles and the Scrantons and what have you, there's a whole lot of nothing. Nothing in trees. And dark and lonely road. Such was the road I was traveling that night, winding through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I've moved around a lot, I mentioned, traveled through most of the continental states anyway. I sometimes used to wonder, when I'd be driving along a patch of asphalt surrounded by only untamed wilderness, what it must have been like to construct such a road. What had it been like before men had intruded with our civilization and our machines? What had lived there? I don't wonder anymore. Not since that night when I went left instead of right.
Oh, okay. You're going to get to a plot now.
I was going to say, that sounds like an opening sentence, basically. Like the end of the opening paragraph.
Like, and if any of our listeners are, writers and, like, this is just my preference. I can't tell anybody what is good writing or bad writing. I'm clearly not an authority. But to me, like, when you get bogged down in the details of, like, I feel like a lot of writers do this, where they get so wrapped up in trying to paint every detail of the picture that it just becomes a mess of information. And so I have no fucking idea what's actually happening at this point.
That is probably one of the most common mistakes writers make. And I get it because, for a long time, one of my favorite authors is Ray Bradbury. And one of the reasons he's one of my favorite authors is he does such a good job of painting with his words, like these very clear visual images.
Yeah.
And so you feel like when I'm thinking of a Bradbury story, I think of describing the wind and the direction it's coming from and the temperature and this and that. But if you actually go back and read one, the reason he is such a well-known and revered writer is because he manages to do it with the least amount of fucking words possible. That is a skill. That is not something that a lot of people can
and it's like
do well.
It's something you can only do, and I think the only way you can do it is by reading writers who are good at it. And like I said, a lot of writers, even like some of the most acclaimed ones, were fucking terrible about this, where it's like you have such a clear idea of like what your story is in your head that you feel like you have to write down every detail of what you see when you think about your story. And it's like, you can't do that, because that's what I mean is like you're bogging the reader down with so much information that you don't give their imagination any leeway to build the story in their head. Like you kind of... your job isn't to tell every literal fucking part of the environment. Your job is to guide them through the plot you want to tell. And it is okay, and it's usually better for the reader to fill in the blanks. So I am joking a little bit, but it is a real pet peeve of mine when a story gets like bogged down in details, when it's like I said, that was like maybe 15 minutes, and we could have started the story now.
Yeah.
With like a 2-sentence intro.
But I get, it's one of the things I'm guilty. A lot of writers are, because
I don't absolve myself either. Like
when you're reading other people's stuff, it's very easy to see what's unnecessary. When you're writing it, like you said, you're trying to paint the exact picture in your head, I keep saying he, and I shouldn't. They. Yeah. The other thing that they do that I am bad about is I've lost count of the number of these sentences that are like 4 or 5 lines long.
Yeah.
Like very rambly sentences too.
I have less of a problem with that because it depends what the voice of like the narrator is. Like sometimes they can be kind of rambly and it fits a character, but yeah, my big thing is like, and that's why I say like editor, Like, even if you just show it to a friend willing to give it a quick read, you can cut out a lot of stuff.
That's what we love about Creepypasta is they're not supposed to be edited. That's the whole point. And again, that's why we're not sitting here saying this author is crap or anything like that, because we know how these stories were written.
It's not that they're not supposed to be edited, but they are a training exercise.
Well, yeah.
I would still say you should get your... Like, even an essay that's not a final in college, you're expected to edit it, you know?
Well, sure. And I assume this seems to be pretty clear of... I haven't come across, like, typos and stuff, so I assume that they edited in that fashion, but not so much for content.
Yeah. That was always something when I was in school that, like, people... Like, I did, you know, not to brag, because it was just English 101 and shit like that. But, like, a lot of people really struggled with the idea of, like, when you're editing, you're not just correcting grammar and shit. Like, editing is about cutting shit and seeing how you could rephrase stuff to be more effective. And this guy, the guy or girl, or they needed a lot more of that.
Well, for all we know, this could have been twice as long.
Oh, God. A rough draft version.
I was driving my Ford Fiesta, which I knew from the VIN number was assembled in Detroit.
I had bought it from a friend of mine. He drove it a lot.
His name was Ted. He worked at Toys R Us.
Okay,
anyway.
Let's start the story a half an hour
in. The way continued to twist back and forth, up and down. As I wound deeper into the foothills, the trees grew thicker, branches from either side of the road reaching over and almost touching, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove with my high beams on because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. That, and you just also said that you're in the middle of fucking nowhere. There's never streetlights there.
You were just complimenting the roads, and now you're on their shit because you don't have streetlights.
He's like, oh, they were a marvel. But what kind of asshole people came through with their machines and put roads in this nature? And also, they didn't put lights on this road. They didn't go far enough. The painted lines were old and not well cared for, and I found myself gradually straddling the faded double yellow partition running down the middle of the two lanes to keep some distance between myself and the trees that increasingly encroached on pavement's edge. I've never been a particularly good navigator. My parents used to say it was because I spent my childhood with my nose pushed into a book during car rides. But I personally just think it's because I'm bad at it. Okay. So it was that, despite there was no possible way I could be lost, as there were no other roads that I could have possibly turned onto and gotten off track, that I more and more frequently found myself checking my phone to ensure that I was still on the right path, which is how I almost ran into the other car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at 0 for the last 20 minutes, and what possible implications that would mean if I should have some kind of emergency. So then I nearly caused an emergency. I raised my eyes back to the road after Google Maps confirmed for probably the 20th time I was still good on my route choice, and after my brain took a beat to process what I was rapidly approaching was a vehicle stopped in the middle of the lanes, slammed my foot on the brake. I think I butchered... I don't know if I butchered that sentence or if they did, but I'm continuing on.
Someone's guilty here.
Yeah. I stopped in time, but not by much, with maybe 5 feet separating my hood from the other car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body, but my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell was this guy doing? Not only was he stopped in the middle of the road, but all his lights were off. If I hadn't had my high beams on, there was a good chance I wouldn't have seen him before I was practically on top of him, even if hadn't been checking my phone. That's very human nature-y. Like, I almost fucked up by, like, being distracted and looking at my phone while driving. But, like, probably, even if I hadn't been, this is somehow your fault.
Do you know how close I was to being irresponsible because of you?
There's no way in hell I could prove this, but I probably would have almost hit you still had I not been not paying attention. I could feel my pulse beating in my vein on the side of my neck. In the vein, whatever. I'm not somebody particularly quick to road rage, although it sounds like it. And after a couple of quick breaths, I managed to get a hold of myself. Not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle, I shifted into reverse and backed up about 20 feet, popping my hazards on. That's when I started noticing a few odd things about the stopped car, more than just the fact that the lights were out. Of course, it was halted directly in the middle of the road, but that wasn't unreasonable since there wasn't any shoulder to speak of that the driver could have moved it over to. The strange thing, though, was that all the doors were open, those on the driver's side even crossing over slightly into the oncoming lane. And on further observation, I saw an item dropped out onto the road by the rear driver's side door, something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal, which is never a good sign. I considered my options and, after a few seconds, decided that I would have to go against my better judgment to just keep on my merry way and head outside. Oh, I see.
And grab the free toy.
He's saying to, go against his better judgment, which would have been to go along his merry way, which sounds like worse judgment, because you should probably check and make sure everybody's okay. I said earlier my job doesn't have anything to do with this story, which is mostly true. But before you judge my decisions too harshly, it bears mentioning that I've spent some time in the military. An obligation to help people has been drilled into me over the years, and I'd seen enough things while deployed to feel I could handle myself. It's weird that he's, defending his decision to check and make sure there's nobody that needs help, as if, the average person wouldn't understand. I'm not saying you'd be wrong to be like, this is creepy, and I don't see any people around, and I'm just going to keep going. But if somebody's like, I'm going to check and make sure there's, not dead people in the car, I understand that, too. So I got out of my car, but kept it running. I popped the trunk and grabbed the flashlight I keep there and left my headlights on so I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to spy signs of other cars approaching, but no luck. Hello? I called up to the other car as I cautiously started my approach, circling around to the left toward the middle of the road so I'd be able to get a look inside before I got too close. Anyone there? No answer. The beams from my headlights helped some, but there were enough shadows to still obscure the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, though, easily determined that no one was inside. I moved closer, stooping down by the rear door to pick up the fallen object off the ground. It was a child's toy, just as I had suspected. I like the word suspected, aha, I thought that was a stuffed animal in the road. A stuffed rabbit with well-worn patches showing signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitched a ride with the passerby, they would have taken the rabbit, or the kid would have thrown a conniption. Also, they probably would have shut their doors. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front. I put my hand on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That meant it couldn't have been here terribly long. I slid into the driver's seat to try to figure out if there was some kind of mechanical issue that would have forced the car to stop, and was startled to find the set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key, and the engine started right up. Headlights and the dome light in the roof sprung to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery, all the gauges looked good. Not even a check engine light. Curiouser and curiouser.
Free car.
I like that. That seems like a normal thing to do, though. I'm going to just see if this car starts. As if, maybe they're just taking a piss in the woods, and all of a sudden they're running out, thinking that you're stealing their fucking car. Because you just, turned it on. Then I saw a person in the passenger seat. I picked it up like a normal person. A normal brown shoulder bag, and briefly rummaged around before finding a wallet inside. So yeah, it really sounds like he's just trying to rob these people, but after the fact, he's trying to justify his actions.
Maybe I should be clear. I was in the military, which means I love to go through people's personal shit.
And just check if their car, which was much nicer than mine, but that's not part of the story,
I love
happened to run.
My shitty car for a good abandoned car.
Well, if they still wanted it, they shouldn't have left it. Move your feet, lose your car. Everything appeared to be intact, about $40 in cash, a couple credit cards, gym membership, Sam's Club card. The driver's license named the owner as Mary Walker, a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. See, that's really creepy, too, that you're going that into depth. Like,
driver's license?
Like, to the point that you're checking out her, like, date of birth and stuff.
Well, hell, legal.
Here we go. A couple pictures showed Mary in staged poses sitting on a blanket under a tree whose leaves were turned red and yellow, captured in the thrall of... So now you're, like, leafing through her pictures. A huge bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind. A small ponytail girl with goofy, over-exaggerated smile on her lap. Wow, that's weird if your smile's on your lap. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was about to get beat the fuck up by a big lumberjack guy, wondering why I'm going through his wife's purse looking at her pictures.
Why are you kissing my wife's driver's license?
A shiver running down the base of my spine. Something was very wrong with this situation. I put everything back in the purse, aside from the $40 cash in the gym membership, and returned it to the seat, turned off the car, and got out. Shutting the driver's door behind me, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911, holding it over my head to try to get a connection with no luck. But now I'm picturing a guy holding the phone like way the fuck up over his head to get
petitioning UFOs to help me.
Well, I'm picturing 911 actually answered, but the phone's way up over his head, so he can't. They're like, oh, but they couldn't hear me, and I couldn't hear them. Cursing softly, I jammed the red end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed that some of the foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trampled like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they might have passed.
Well,
but even then,
woodcraft.
Yeah. Like, I can't build a curio cabinet or even a chair, so I don't know how long they had walked through the foliage.
My woodcraft stat is only 5. Needs to be at least 8.
But he already talked about putting his hand on the worm, like, so you know, like, even if it's like, I couldn't look at the blade of grass and tell exactly how many seconds had passed since it had been trampled. It's like, yeah, nobody can. I couldn't imagine any scenario for why they would have gone wandering, other than maybe to take a piss, like I had said.
I love to bring my family out hours and hours for one big family dump in the woods.
Well, maybe they ate at the same diner he did. They had the runs, and it's about to strike him, too.
I won't have you disparage no-name diner.
Shining my light into the woods, the beam only extended maybe 30 feet through the trees before being effectively swallowed by the greedy blackness. Looking at the flattened foliage and the stuffed rabbit in my hand, then at the dark trees crowding maliciously, my thoughts teetered back and forth between what I should do. I made up my mind. I'd been trained to help people. It was hardwired into my system. There was a child somewhere in the woods taking a shit, and they needed toilet paper. I raised my foot to take a step onto the beaten path, and that's when a white flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally, her arms swaying out of sync with the rest of her body, like a marionette manipulated by an inexperienced puppeteer. So again, I feel like he's trying to explain to a judge, like, I was just checking to make sure the car worked. I was just looking through her purse to see where she lived. She just happened to be naked when I found her.
Yeah, it's not going to be a good defense for him.
Mm-mm. Hello, her voice called out. Anyone there? More shapes came into view behind her, shambling along. Here, the bearded man who must be Mary's husband. There, her little daughter, owner of the well-loved rabbit, both naked, moving as oddly as their wife and mother. And now I could tell there was more, many more. Their forms indistinct out of the direct light, but so many they caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their odd, staggering passage. Their voices a chorus. Hello, they called out. Anyone there? Parroting back the questions I'd asked only a few short minutes ago when I'd approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and the approaching automatons, tripping into the walker's car. Catching my balance, I voluntarily shone my light up into the pitch recesses of the branches, and in doing so, I could just make out, barely, a sort of darkness crouched hidden in the upper limits, a void even darker than the trees. Was it my imagination? Those lines of pure blackness that extended from the concealed mass and seemed to pierce the flesh of Mary Walker and her kin, and the countless other shapes moving in concert with them. Hello? Anyone there? I sprinted then, back to my car, engine mercifully still running, headlights and hazards flashing welcomingly. Hello? I shifted into reverse, miraculously keeping enough of my head to avoid running off the road as I completed the 3-point turn. Anyone there? I chanced to glance in my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood, halted just at the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, beckoning me to return, or perhaps waving goodbye, her face a mask of confused sadness. I pressed the gas and drove back the way I came. I did not look back again. The rest of the trip was a fog. At some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents, let them know I wouldn't be getting in until late. I drove on autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared off while I was off.
Yeah, this guy's like fucking hero mode. Fucking died in like 2 seconds, didn't it?
It did. Yes. I was in the military. I knew what to do. Not about the naked fucking marionettes.
There's something built in me that I had to help people unless I got scared.
I thought about calling 911, but didn't. What would I have told them? And to what end?
It. Missing family.
Right. Like, what would I have told them? Just say there's a abandoned car in the middle of this road, and it looked like people might be in trouble. You don't have to mention the naked marionettes.
To be fair, they would find his fingerprints all over that shit.
Well, that's true.
He'd be totally busted.
That's very true. And probably some, like, mangled bodies with the blood drained from them. I try not to go through life with too many regrets, wondering about what-ifs, but this choice... What if I had left earlier in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would have still gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken by that black thing fishing in the dark. What if I had gone right? Would I still be ignorantly going through life, unknowing that there are other things out there? I try not to think of it too often, but every now and then, my thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night that I realized I had still clutched it in my hand. I like to think, like, clutched it to his chest, like he was, like, holding it for comfort. It was his stuffy.
Needed a sippy cup.
In the military, I had learned that you clutch a stuffed animal to your chest when you're scared, and then you turn and go the other way.
You have Mr. Bun Bun with you always, and when Charlie's bearing down on you, everybody pull out Ted.
I used to wonder before men brought our roads and civilization, what was the wilderness like? What lived there? I don't wonder anymore. I can't. Yeah, that's just as terrifying as, like, shadow things to me.
Maybe more so. Apparently shadow things you can get back in your car.
Yeah.
Just drive away from. A bear will fuck you up.
I got back to my car, there was a bear sitting in the passenger seat. Fuck, I thought. Military didn't train me for this. I don't wonder anymore. I can't afford to. At least if I don't want to wake up screaming. And no matter how bad the traffic, I always stick to the interstate. The end.
Oh my God. I found a long fucking dark, lonely road.
Yeah, I think I see kind of part of the issue there is I think that was a pretty cool idea. The idea of, like, this shadowy creature that, like, traps its victims, and they're like this literal marionette. Like, although I feel like that whole description, and again, my reading doesn't do these stories any favor because I'm stumbling through them too. But like, I feel like it could have been clearer and made more horrific, like the idea that they were literally on these like supernatural strings and this creature was up in the trees trying to like use them as puppets to lure the next victim in. Like that whole idea is really cool to me. Like I'm not...
If it explored it. I
right.
feel like we spent so much time on preamble.
Yeah, that was literally one paragraph in the entire story was that. And everything else was like, I'm good at judging times of, car travel, and I travel around from place to place. And by the way, interstates were built for convenience.
Yeah. And it's like we've said, it's not just like tons of storytellers do this. Like there are podcasters who are otherwise entertaining, but they drive me insane when they're trying to remember a story, and they'll get bogged down in like fucking roads and shit. And I'll be like, it doesn't matter. Like, just fucking get to the event. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't take much imagination to imagine a road. All you have to say is there was a road. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I've caught myself doing it too. I'm not trying to sound like, oh, I'm above this, but there's certain people in my life that are prone to this when telling like face-to-face stories, and like that whole like, I can only imagine my facial expression, like hoping that I'm hiding the like, just shut the fuck up and like get to the point, man. Like, and when you're close enough, if it's someone like my brother rambles, and that's kind of his thing, so I let him go do it. But there's certain people that you'll be like,
skip
yeah,
to the end,
I get it. Just just what's your point here? Yeah. But when it's like a stranger, as much as we like joke around about being like assholes that are antisocial, like I try to like abide by social norms, like
and not jump on people's shit for how they talk.
Right.
But I was gonna say, like the idea of this story isn't a bad one. The problem is like that's your plot, and they don't explore it at all. Like that's the setup for a story, and instead you did this kind of pull the rug out from underneath the reader, where you're like, hey, you know that thing that always happens in movies where like there's some sort of horrible threat and the car breaks down and they don't have their normal escape route? What if they had their escape? And then like, okay, so nothing happened. Like,
yeah, I mean, and it's still, and I would get like the whole point is like, oh, now I'm traumatized for life by what I saw. It's like, cool. But like none of that really lands because of the ratio of setup to plot is just so far.
But also,
so far
I
off.
would argue if you cut out all that stuff I said earlier that you should cut out, then you don't have a story yet. Like that is, I think the biggest problem with this story is it's really fucking padded, and the real plot and the thing it should dive into, it doesn't do at all, really. Like, it didn't flesh out the core idea that it should have. All it did was take an exhaustingly long time to set it up. And I feel like a real dick shitting on this, but it's like the pacing for this, it was just unbelievable to me. And then to like have the point where it's like, here's the spooky ghost things, and then just be like, and then I drove away. Like that's okay. Well then, yeah, that would be spooky. Like that's almost like a story someone would tell on a show, trying to convince me ghosts were real.
Right. Yeah.
Which is fine, but you're doing a creepypasta. We're all on the same page that this is fiction, so just embrace it and dive into the fiction, I don't need to believe that you know all the roads in Pennsylvania. I just, like...
We want to know something interesting, though, is... And I don't know, maybe you pulled up the page on the Creepypasta website that we use. At the bottom, there's links to... I just counted 13 different people who have done audio narrations of the story. So
well, that's a business.
But I mean, it's resonated enough that like,
not really. As somebody who listens to a lot of those YouTube channels. They don't have a lot of content.
Yeah, so they do like us. They just
because they have to make like a fucking hour and a half narration video every fucking day. So that's why there are so many of those channels that ran out of creepypastas, and then they're like, "Here's shit I got from Reddit."
You know what? It does do that I like when creepypastas do, and they all do it, and it again hits on this is going to make me sound like I'm trying to be an elitist asshole. But this is another one of those stories that you read, and like I said, I like the core kernel of an idea in it so much. It's like you almost want to sit down after we're done recording and rewrite the story like yourself.
Huh. I mean, I just felt like there's not enough fleshed out there. And I don't mean fleshed out like you have to explain what your monster is or any of that stuff. But the character, your protagonist, has to go through something.
Yeah,
with
something more than just I saw this horrific thing,
and then I saw a thing, and then I got home.
Right.
You know, like that can't be the end of your story. And my dogs agree; they're pissed. So yeah, like I think. Shut up! Hey, shut up, dog.
Shut your trap.
God damn it! Shut up. But yeah, like I think, you know, it's like I said, you got to lean into if you're writing fiction, just embrace it, and like you don't have to spend that much time on the mundane part of your world to convince me that your character's normal and living in a normal world, up to the point where weird shit happens. So like this one, it wouldn't be one for me where I would be like, oh, I could write that better, because I don't really know what it was.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I liked at least a little bit of a glimpse into the creature that it gave us, and it's like it'd be interesting to explore because and one of the things that it kind of implied, but I don't think clearly enough, is like he got back on the road and there were no trees overhead, so it's not like because they're literal marionettes, so the creature couldn't like continue to come after him because he didn't have his perch above him. But there's a lot of ways that he could have been deeper in the woods and had to find clearings and been surrounded by. The main character in any story needs a good struggle, and then that's not a breaking news. I mean, that's a major element of storytelling, and this character just never quite there was the struggle. There was I saw this horrific thing, and now I have to live with the knowledge that these horrific things are out there. But that's not powerful enough. It needed to be ratcheted
it's very
up.
Mundane. This guy this main character almost feels like they just missed the plot of a horror story.
Yeah, it's kind of like
they came in afterwards and were like, and maybe that was the goal.
It's kind of like writing
sort of be like, that's fucked up.
It's like writing a story about a character who almost witnesses a horrific car accident, but it doesn't happen, and that's the end. And it's like, and then I went home with the knowledge that family was almost killed, and it's like, well, that's not a compelling story. Like in real life, it is. If I saw somebody almost get killed, I'd probably be talking about that with friends, like, oh, hey, geez, the other day this car blew through a red light and just about creamed this car full of people. It was horrible. But as a story that you're telling and writing, that's not, an almost bad thing happening is not a strong.
Yeah. I mean, the key element to any fiction you write is conflict. No matter what genre you're in, your character has to undergo at least one thing, because how they develop from where they start to where they end, there needs to be something affecting that change in them.
And from that perspective, if you think about it, from this specific story, the character's biggest conflict was a traffic jam, not a supernatural creature that killed a family on the road. Because he spent way more time complaining and fighting and struggling with traffic than he did this thing.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's fun to critique these things. And again, like we always disclaim, we're not saying, oh, this writer's crap or anything. We're pointing out where the story, in our opinion, could be better. And again, I'll point out that I am not a professor of storytelling with a PhD in creepypasta-ing.
I'm just riffing on shit, guys. Okay? Can I fucking riff?
And maybe one day if I have
from the internet and have fun with it.
And maybe one day if I have the energy again, because I almost went this route, I'll write my own thing again so that we can pull that apart.
I was just thinking as I was shitting on this one that I was like, you know what, I should probably write my own just to make this fair
I was
again.
very close to attempting that today, but it would have been me starting at we record at 6:00 p.m. my time. I know you're out west, so different bin time. But I work 9 to 5 too, so that's in there. And a lot of times I'll have to kind of cram stuff or finish it up at least in between stuff at work. And so trying to write an entire story in about a 30-minute time frame of when I'm got downtime, I was like, yeah, that won't work. But I would like to. At some point I will write my own original.
That's when I would just start describing a drive down a road in exhausting detail. If I had to get a story ready in 30 minutes.
The problem is going to be...
Then I turned left, but then I realized I should have turned right, so I looped back around, and then I went straight, because that would have been right originally.
I think the problem is going to be, last time we did this, the last time I remember writing something original, I kind of did that one where I kind of fudged the narrative, but it was a true story, but I'm not counting that. The last time we wrote creepypastas, I was intentionally kind of going for the creepypasta vibe, not... You never try to write bad, but I also wasn't trying to write serious. I think the next time I write something original, that'll mark the end of the show, because I'll try to write something really good, and then you'll be shitting all over it, and I'll be sitting here yeah, and then after the show I'll be like, fuck you,
all fucking beaten down and.
Except for one thing about being Steve Gibson is that I've gotten incredibly good at taking criticism over the 39 years of my life.
And it doesn't really matter for me. I'm always obnoxiously poor at taking criticism. Love dishing it out, but super sensitive. So, yeah, but yeah, I do think we're overdue to give that a shot. My biggest problem is I actually don't have that many ideas.
Ideas, talent, time, motivation, energy. There's a lot of things I'm lacking in the tank.
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
But maybe we'll do that.
What's going to happen is I've been trying to walk every day in the morning just to get more activity in. But while I walk, I've been listening to a collection of Stephen King short stories, and I've not been the biggest Stephen King fan over the years. And I don't want to try to say that oh, he's a hack, because he's fucking clearly not. He's one of the most successful writers in our time. But I don't jive with his writing style 100%. But his short stories I like a lot better for the most part. But what'll happen is, because I'm listening to something and I'm stupid and my brain can't separate things, I'll sit down to write something original, get to the end and realize I just rewrote...
Oh, wow. I just wrote the entirety of Stephen King's It. Word for word. Holy shit.
They're all buoyant down here. Be like, what? That's totally original. Oh, fuck. No, it's not.
It wouldn't be that good. You wouldn't use buoyant. You'd be like, they're all balloony down here.
Yeah.
Anyway, hour 10 minutes. We gotta wrap this shit up, or I'll be editing it forever. Fuck it. Bye. Sorry, shadow friend.
Stick to the highways. They're convenient.
Actually, I will say this. Nothing about word to word. The sentences, the actual writing seemed fine. So that's my quick little olive branch. God, I'm an asshole.